Again, my name is Senior Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Agati. I'm currently the Chief of the Homicide Unit at the New Hampshire Department of Justice. It's my understanding folks might have a couple of questions. We've just had our verdict upstairs with regards to the State versus Adam Montgomery. He was found guilty on all the charges that were pending against him. That included second-degree assault for punching and causing a black eye on Harmony back in July of 2019. As well as for all of the offenses that he was charged with, that the jury found him guilty of beyond a reasonable doubt for the second-degree murder of his daughter, Harmony Montgomery, as well as falsifying physical evidence, the abuse of her corpse, and witness tampering with regards to Kayla Montgomery. Those I know are certainly the charges. I'm happy to take questions at any time from any questions that people would have.
And we're interested to know how you're feeling in this moment.
Very, very grateful for the jury. This is a very, very difficult case in terms of the number of witnesses that had to testify, that they had to listen to. This jury had to pay attention to 50 witnesses in a little over the course of roughly 8 days. That's a lot of testimony. There's a lot of different factors. You had multiple different charges. They had to consider the July crime separate from what occurred in December and on forward. That's a lot of work for a jury, and they have done that very, very well. And so we were greatly appreciative to the jury's time and attention. They had to listen to facts that the Manchester Police Department and that the community have lived with. And I think a lot of people didn't really know all the facts until they actually heard and saw the witnesses at trial. And as a result of that, again, we're very, very grateful for the jury for their time and their attention on this, and it's a very big relief that they have seen through and that they've held him accountable for the actions that he's committed.
And as prosecutors and law enforcement, I know this isn't about you, but I can't help but notice that there were some tears in your eyes. This case was different. Talk about that and why.
I would say, I don't know if I would say it's different, only because I know other statements that I've heard in the past is to say, why was so much time and resources put towards this little girl? And sometimes even from others saying, well, where are the resources for these other cases? Every person who has their life taken from them on murder, whether it is a 5-year-old child or a 63-year-old man or a 45-year-old, every single person has a value of their lives. And so while some have said, why was so much attention here, that attention is something that the Manchester Police Department, that all of the different law enforcement agencies put into every homicide case in this state. And so this case was different in terms of some of the attention that it garnered, but not in terms of the value of Harmony's life or the value of anybody else's life being taken here in New Hampshire and having the same attention being brought to it and trying to hold those accountable in a court of law, hold them accountable and have some justice.
There was an extra dimension of community involvement because this started as a missing persons case. And it just feels like there is a more public vested interest in all homicides. I didn't mean to equivocate
That's okay.
this case.
That's
but,
okay.
There is a next level to this because of that community involvement from the moment of that New Year's Eve press conference where they said, help us find this little girl.
And that community involvement has been tremendous. Residents in Manchester, but not even just Manchester. So there were residents all around the country who had different tips. We heard some of that at trial with regards to tips that came in from Florida, from Arizona, and those tips were followed up on by partners that we've worked with, the Manchester Police Department has worked with for years, and they were so important to being able to find even sometimes very, very minute pieces. Again, at trial, we heard about one particular tip in Arizona that was tracked down, and somebody thought that is worthwhile to call in to try to find somebody who was missing. And that mattered. And you might think it doesn't matter, but it really does matter. And that's the type of work that was done here. And it's not just the Manchester Police Department, although they have been lions in pursuing this case. It's also the work of the partners that they've been able to team up with. That's New Hampshire State Police, New Hampshire Fish and Game, here in this state, as well. I almost gave the list. I got to remember New Hampshire Department of Corrections and their investigative staff, who've done also a fantastic job. Its counterparts in other states, as you heard during trial, Massachusetts State Police, Massachusetts State Police Dive Team, the Revere Police You've heard in trial, we was also had assistance from the Maine State Police, also from Maine Fish and Game, our federal partners, Billy Tufts and everybody over there at the U.S. Marshal Service, as well as the United States Attorney's Office here for the state of New Hampshire. You also had a tremendous amount of work by the FBI in the search of 644 Union Street and other work there. If you want to talk about outside coalitions, not only those other departments, but the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which does this work not only on this case, but every missing adult and child that they can help out every day. You're also talking about some outside agencies like New England Canine Search and Rescue, who volunteered their dogs to be able to help search on several different places. That is a community response. It's a national response. And it could not be more appreciated in a moment like right now.
We just heard from Harmony's mother, and you may have addressed this already, but she still hopes to find Harmony. Where, does this mean the end of the search for Harmony? What?
Excellent question, and the answer is it does not. One of the things that we could not state before, but we can more clearly state now after the verdict, is during trial, people heard the last place that Adam Montgomery had driven that U-Haul to. And I have some specifics on that. I'm hoping people are paying attention. He had that U-Haul between March 3rd into March 4th in 2020. He drove 133 miles. We heard about that on that U-Haul. Subtracting back the 2.3 miles back and forth, or sorry, 3.2 from the rental, that left him with roughly a 106-mile road trip all the way down, at least through the Tobin bridge tolls, we know, northbound, southbound, northbound again through those tolls, and then back to Manchester. That only left him with 26 miles of driving that he could have done between where he was at the Econo Lodge in Manchester and going through the Tobin those 3 times. What that means is, and we know that he went through no New Hampshire tolls, so what that means is that she is somewhere along that route. And you heard about the searches that have been done, specifically in the Rumney Marsh Reservation in Revere, around the Sales Creek area, the Chelsea Creek area, behind North Shore Road. Revere Police, Mass State Police have been relentless in searching those areas with the Manchester Police Department. These ladies and gentlemen drove down and worked with them hand in hand. Those are still our big areas of search, and our big areas that we're hoping that somebody sees something. Everybody who might have seen the trial also would have seen the CMC bag, and there was a demonstrative that was used during trial. It was the exact same type bag. It had light tan, it was canvas, had dark colored straps, and had a CMC logo in the middle. That was positively identified by multiple witnesses as the bag that Adam Montgomery had the last night that he had that bag and the U-Haul. So that bag went somewhere along that route and somewhere within, no more than 26 miles off of that route down and back to Revere. Also at this trial, what was pointed out was the fact that Adam Montgomery was from the Revere area. He would know it very well. That is still a high area of interest, and we are still asking for anybody now who has heard this information, who's seen this information, if you see this bag, if you hear about this bag, if you walk in one of these areas and you take the dog out for a walk, if you see anything like that that seems to be disturbed, to please let us know. You heard also at trial that Harmony's body was bagged up several times inside of that CMC bag. There's a high likelihood that there may still be parts of her that we can recover, part of her body, pardon me just for a second, part of her body that we can recover. We're really hoping that we can do that. We really hope that she can get the burial that she deserves, that everybody deserves.
Do you think that he'll ever cooperate with you and your investigators and lead you to the body at any point? Do you have hope for that?
I don't know that I can speculate with regards to what Adam Montgomery thinks, the choices that he's made between when he did this, the choice to do what he did, and then the choices he's made since then. I can't speculate on what choice he may make in the future about whether or not to say where she is. But he knows where she is. So,
Ken, what's your
right second. Go ahead.
message to anyone that thinks they can dispose of a body and get away with murder in New Hampshire?
With regards to that, if anybody who thinks that they can do that, certainly we have cases every day where individuals do things like that. They try to falsify physical evidence, and the work of law enforcement has been tireless to find out who they are, track them down, and hold them accountable.
And can
Go
you
ahead.
speak-
Oh,
Yeah,
hold on
I'm
just a second. She got you
wondering,
first.
Does he have to be here for sentencing, or could he skip that as well?
Under RSA 651:4-A, and I know that's a mouthful, but underneath that particular statute, it says that a defendant shall be brought forward for a statement from a victim in a crime involving a homicide and needs to be here for sentencing unless otherwise excused by the court. That's the statute. As you may have heard in the courtroom, we will be filing with the court and asking the court to enforce that RSA so that he is present for sentencing.
But
Go
Greg,
ahead.
this was a tough case. The victim has never been found, so you prosecuted a murder without a body. And your star witness was somebody who had credibility issues, yet it only took this jury about 7 hours to come back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Do you have any thoughts on how that all came together? Because that's not an easy thing to do.
Well, I obviously don't know what the deliberations were back in the jury. That is sacrosanct with the jury. It's something that neither the court nor the parties will ever ask about. That's their decision-making of how they went forward. But one of the things you saw at trial was the tremendous amount of corroboration here. So it wasn't just one person and their say-so, even though that person's say-so could have been enough to simply find a guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There were so many other parts to this, so many other witnesses that did come forward that corroborated different parts of the story that had been told. So I think taking the whole into account is something that every jury does, and certainly I would imagine that that's what this jury did here as well.
What sense did you get from the jury? Do you think they got it? I mean, obviously you delivered a guilty verdict, but talking to them, was there a sense that this was going to end up this way?
I don't know that I had any more sense than anyone else in terms of, usually when giving a closing argument, certainly that's something where I'm focused more on making sure that I'm telling and recounting what happened truthfully and accurately for the jury. You folks would be in a better position than I would to be able to read the jury and try to interpret how they were receiving it.
How about in terms of him not showing up before? How did that impact the trial, do you think?
Well, the jury was specifically instructed. They could not take that into account. They could not even discuss that during deliberation. So we imagine that the jury followed the judge's instructions and that was not taken into account. That is his choice. If he chooses to not be here for trial, then that's what he would like, and that's what he gets.
Are you
So-
looking forward to seeing him at sentencing? I mean, you've been working on this case for some time.
The only thing I can respond to that is at the last sentencing that occurred, which was last year, he stated that he did not kill his daughter and that he looked forward to the trial. We look very much forward to sentencing.